Hello and welcome to the Farming Week, the podcast from Agriland that keeps you up to date with all the latest in Irish agriculture. I'm Francess McDonnell and today I'm joined by my colleagues Aisling O'Brien and Louise Hickey. There's one subject that no one has been able to escape from this week, regardless of wherever you are in the country, and that is, yet again, the weather. Rain has been a persistent problem this year, and we all know that this has had a major impact on grass growth. Aisling, you attended the latest meeting of the National Fodder and Food Security Committee earlier this week. So, could some farmers at this stage be facing a potential fodder deficit?
Well, the answer is yes, Francis. And as you rightly said, we have been reporting on Agriland in recent weeks and months about the below average grass growth rate out there on farmers. So maybe the findings of the survey will have come as no surprise to some farmers out there. Michael O'Donovan, the head of grassland science at Teagasc, told the committee this week that grass growth has reduced by about 10% so far in 2024. Now, he did say that slurry and chemical nitrogen applications are beginning to get up to date on farms after a very slow start earlier in the year. Now, he did say that there could be an average growth rate of 12 tonnes of dry matter per hectare this year, but that is dependent on there being average growth for the remainder of this year. Now, we did hear, as I said, details of a survey undertaken by Teagasc on fodder stocks. That was about 500 client farms of Teagasc who responded, and it was pretty much evenly spread between dairy and dry stock farmers. So the head of the Dairy Knowledge Transfer Programme with Teagasc, Dr. Joe Patton, said based on the findings of that survey, up to 30% of farms across both dairy and dry stock enterprises are currently reporting significant winter feed deficits. Now that means that these farms have more than a 10 to 15% deficit following first cut silage, and normally it would be around 12 to 15% of farms who would be reporting such a shortfall at this time of the year. So it's nearly twice the normal amount at this time of the year. Now, he said that there is some evidence of an emerging winter feed deficit across the country, which will require action on affected farms. Now, he said dairy farms reported having an average of 60% of their winter feed requirement in place after first cut silage. On dry stock farms, there was an average of 64% of fodder saved following first cut. Now, he said that the target for first cut on dairy farms normally is about 70% of their winter feed requirement, and it's between 75 and 80% on dry stock farms. Now, apart from some dry stock farms in the northwest of the country, which were the closest to target after first cut, we heard that there was no significant regional bias in this survey. So that means that essentially the issues are widespread across the rest of the country. And of the farms that have a deficit, Joe Patton said that 68% of dry stock farms and 58% of dairy farms expected to meet their fodder budget target following second cut silage. Now, the survey found that on farms where there are winter fodder shortages identified at this stage, half of dairy farms and 66% of dry stock farms have actually made no provision at this stage for extra winter feed. And in terms of mitigation for farmers who maybe have taken or are about to take some action, renting extra land for grass silage was the most popular mitigation option at 64%, followed by planting forage crops or sourcing forage crops, which came in at about 36%. Now, we were also told this week that 30% of the farms with a feed deficit have some cash flow concerns, and of those, 12% have a very significant cash flow query, is what we were told. Now, 64% of dairy farms and 35% of dry stock farms with a deficit said that they would consider reducing livestock numbers due to possible fodder shortfalls this year as well. So the advice, Francis, that we were given at the committee, because I'm sure that there are farmers out there who are listening to us who may be in this position, Joe Patton said that all farmers out there should complete a fodder budget. That will be done by assessing their winter feed requirement based on the livestock numbers that they're expecting to carry and feed demand versus the fodder stocks that they have on farm at the moment. And he also suggested maybe perhaps asking a neighbour or a trusted friend, maybe your agricultural advisor, if you're not 100% sure of how to do that at the moment, or maybe just to, double check your figures that you're on the right track. And sometimes, that can give you a little bit of confidence in the coming months as well. Now, in terms of the gaps that might need to be filled out there. Firstly, he pointed to second and possibly, if needed, third cut silage as a way to bridge that gap, obviously. But then obviously he said that you could source fodder from rented grass or from forage crops as well. And he said that any livestock for culling should be identified as early as possible in the season. Now, he also said that farmers should assess their fertiliser use to date against their allowances and plan fertiliser applications for the coming months to enhance any grass growth out there on farm as well. And look, several members of the committee did note, and that was across farming organisations and actually representatives from the fertiliser industry as well, that there is clarity needed from the Department of Agriculture when it comes to fertiliser allowances for farmers. They said that some farmers out there are terrified to put out too much nitrogen, say, for instance, and that they don't want to go over their allowance and they're unsure of what they're allowed to use. And Louise Byrne, the Deputy Chief Inspector at the department, said that fertiliser allowances are very farm specific, and obviously they're tailored to each individual farm. And she encouraged farmers to engage with their advisors on that issue as well. And she said maybe it might be something that the department might look at as well in terms of their communications around this area and making sure that farmers have the reassurance that they can use their fertiliser allowances, because we were hearing from the fertiliser sector that there was an underuse of fertiliser because of that fear of breaching the regulations. And look, the chair of the committee, Mike McGann, closed the meeting by calling on the industry and farmers to stay vigilant and proactive over the coming weeks and months ahead in terms of planning for winter feed supplies. And he said, look, there is expected to be an improvement in grass growth in recent weeks, that it has returned to more normal levels. But he said that the actions taken by farmers over the next 2 months can close the fodder gap significantly. And he said about those actions that when they're taken early within the farm gate, they will be the most cost effective, because, as our colleague Breffney O'Brien said recently on this podcast, it's better to be looking at the forage than for it when the winter comes in.
And I suppose really it's the next 2 months that are critical then.
Absolutely. It really is, Frances. I think that was the message from the committee, that look, there are issues out there at the moment. There are issues of concern out there, but there is a chance to make up that shortfall at this stage of the season, hopefully. And look, as an aside, one of the interesting points made by the Association of Farm and Forestry Contractors in Ireland, the FCI, they actually noted the damage that was being caused to contractors' machinery out there while they were cutting silage in recent weeks due to stones and wires being left in fields. And Michael Moroney said that they were aware of the fact that during March and April conditions mightn't have been suitable for rolling ground, but they said that some farmers were able to do it where others weren't. And he said that the result of land management issues was that contractors could actually lose up to 20% of their time, which would be 20 acres a day less silage actually being harvested, because contractors were spending half of their time taking wire out of machines or trying to get stones out and to repair damage as well. So he just said that is something for all farmers to consider as well, if they can get out there and maybe have a look at making sure that wires aren't out there, and maybe do a bit of rolling as well if possible, and try and do a bit of stone picking. Nobody's favourite job, but it's something that can maybe improve efficiency for the contractors out there as well.
And one of the other key issues that came out of the committee was around straw supply.
Yeah, Frances. So straw, as we've said on the podcast, was a very hotly discussed topic, particularly last winter when farmers were struggling to secure supplies in some areas. And the Teagasc tillage specialist Shay Phelan told the meeting that some €10 million in funding would be allocated to the straw incorporation measure this year, compared to some 12.5 million last year. So this would mean, in his opinion, that less crops would be going into the scheme this year, which could increase the availability of straw then. He said that some farmers were taking land out of the scheme in favour of baling straw to sell it instead to farmers. And he said based on that, then there probably will be more straw available this year compared to 2023. However, that does come with a caveat, because he said due to later spring planting, it will lead to a later harvest. And obviously that can come with risks in terms of weather concerns, and that could impact the ability to bale the straw as well. And he also noted that there is no excess straw left over from last year, because obviously it was in such high demand. So it is obviously something to be aware of. And on that, he advised farmers to basically go out there and to book as much straw as they possibly can for their needs at this stage, and maybe even put down a deposit if they can to guarantee supply. And he said he believed that that's what happened to a lot of people last year. They waited until the harvest was actually over, and then when they went looking for the straw, it wasn't there, or they had to source it from further afield, essentially. And he also did give an update as well on tillage crops, Frances. You can read more about that on Agriland, in terms of the overall indications being that the cereal area is going to be down by 7,800 hectares this year. He said due to poor planting season and pressure from grassland as well. And overall grain yields could be down by between 100,000 and 150,000 tonnes this year. But he said that it was very early to be making a prediction like that, any firm prediction. But that was a figure that was mentioned during the meeting as well. And look, as a side note, I suppose staying with tillage as well, one of our very popular stories this week on the site, Frances, and on the app, came from our colleague and tillage specialist Richard Halloran, and he reported this week that Teagasc is advising that glyphosate cannot be used to desiccate cereal crops prior to harvest, as the new regulation has kicked in this year. However, there is one exemption, that is using herbicide in crops with very heavy weed infestations. And for more information on that, check out the story on our app and our website.
And let's just stick with the committee just for another minute, if you don't mind, Aisling, because I know you mentioned there previously issues around cash flow. And that was a trend that was identified at the committee this week, and that banks are actually beginning to see the first signals of cash flow tightness.
Yeah, definitely a huge talking point from the committee. It was probably second only to the fodder. It was cash flow. And the deputy president of the IFA, Alice Doyle, said that they had carried out a survey recently of their members, and cash flow emerged as the top issue amongst farmers and their concerns out there at the moment. And the meeting heard that on farms where there are cash flow issues, it is of course going to impact their ability to buy fertilizer, which is needed to kick on grass growth for additional winter fodder. So that is a cause for concern, Frances, as well. And Alice Doyle said that the IFA would encourage farmers who may need finance to look to maybe the Strategic Banking Corporation of Ireland, the SBCI loans, because they've lower interest rates, and maybe to consider the credit union as an option as well. And she called on banks to ensure easier access to money for farmers in the coming months. And she also urged co-ops out there to be as flexible and understanding as possible with farmers when it comes to maybe restructuring overdue debts. And she pointed the finger at the industry as well, and she said they need to make a big effort to pay the maximum price available to farmers for their produce over the coming months ahead. And as you rightly said, we did hear from the banks as well at the meeting. The head of agriculture at Bank of Ireland, Owen Lowry, said that the bank is beginning to see these first signals of cash flow tightness on farms. And he said that farmers are using any cash deposits that they have available, and that overdraft utilisation levels are starting to increase. He actually said there's been a 25% increase in overdraft applications in April and May, which shows that farmers are looking for credit. They're looking for finance at this point as well. He said that the bank is very aware of the cash flow need that's out there due to the poor weather conditions that have driven up costs on farms. You know, there's a lot of farmers out there who've been feeding extra meal, especially on dairy farms, to keep up their milk yield and their solids as well, against some poor grass growth. And you've farmers who are also digging into silage reserves as well. He said that the current picture, it's totally different to last year when farmers were coming off strong prices in 2022 and they had some cash flow reserves. They're not in that position this year, Frances. And he said, you know, the bank can provide working capital, but the real issue for farmers will be for them to determine themselves how much support they're actually going to need. And for that, you're going to have a look and do a cash flow budget, very similar to the fodder budget, for your enterprise as soon as possible, if it is something that you think you are running into some cash flow difficulties at this time of the year. And that was echoed as well by John Farrell, who's the agri specialist with AIB. And he said that they haven't seen that significant of an increase in requests for working capital from their customers just yet. But he did note that there's always a time lag before customers come and talk to them. So he said, you know, it is something that they are keeping an eye on, and he urged all farmers who are in difficulty to reach out to the bank as well to qualify what supports that they might need at this stage and looking into the winter months ahead. And look, before we leave it, several members of the committee did say that scheme payments are something that are very important. Frances, we've been speaking about delayed scheme payments. They called on the Department of Agriculture to make sure that scheme payments are made on time, because of course that could ease cash flow pressures as well on farmers. And Louise Byrne from the department said that the scheme dates have been outlined in the Farmers' Charter, which we reported on Agriland in recent weeks. And she said those dates are the dates that they have committed to since last year and they haven't changed. And she said the department will be aiming to pay the most farmers the highest possible amount of money in the first week of payments, which will be beginning with the ANC, the Areas of Natural Constraints scheme, in September. So hopefully that the department can deliver on that commitment, because there's a lot of farmers out there who will be obviously waiting for payments like that.
Yeah, and we also have been told this week, whenever we've been out about, September is a pressure point for farm families when they go back to school, they go back to university. There's a lot of bills that kind of accumulate at that time of year. And another thing that we've been hearing is that encouraging farmers to talk to each other or talk to an advisor or get advice early, and don't let the situation get worse and worse each day.
Absolutely. And look, Frances, we're all guilty of it. It doesn't matter where you work, what industry you're in. We're all guilty of putting our head in the sand a little bit when it comes to finances. But, you know, it is something that maybe can help you take a little bit of control back of something that you might feel is a bit out of your control, is to sit down and do those figures out at the kitchen table, whether it is to do with fodder or finance, because look, it has been a very, very tough year to date for farmers. And that's the advice that's out there at the moment. And hopefully it is of some help to farmers to get through this difficult period.
And against that backdrop, it is slightly worrying then that we see the Irish Creamery Milk Suppliers Association saying that the average dairy farmer income is now well below the minimum legal hourly wage. Has the ICMSA given any indication, Aisling, of what the estimated average income is now?
Yeah, so the farm organisation has made these comments ahead of the publication of this year's National Farm Survey from Teagasc, which the ICMSA is telling us is expected to show a serious drop in dairy farmer incomes. And the ICMSA President Dennis Drennan said they believe that the average dairy farmer income will now be coming in at under €50,000 for 2023. But he did say that figure hides the true extent that is, in their words, the disgrace that is dairy farmer income in 2024. And he provided an example of this for the average dairy farmer who's milking 92 cows, with each cow producing 6,000 litres, which would give a total production of 552,000 litres. He said based on a milk price of 43 cent a litre with production cost of 37 cent a litre, giving a net of just 6 cent a litre, that farm is now earning a total of approximately 33,000 from the milk enterprise. And he said then farmers would have repayments in the order of around 15,000, which would reduce their income to €18,000. And that 18,000 is based on farmers working a 60-hour week, and it represents what he called our most skilled farmers who support a multi-billion euro sector, earning a grand total of €5.76 per hour. And that includes working Sundays and bank holidays. I'm sure many farmers will say, what's a bank holiday, Frances? I've never heard of that. And Dennis Drennan said that is less than half of the minimum hourly wage. And he said it's an absolute disgrace. And he said that he has repeated his calls on the Minister for Agriculture, Charlie McConalogue, to convene an all-sector farm summit as soon as possible to discuss the issues that are going on in the dairy sector, the income pressures that are there for the sector, and, you know, to take the wheel and stop what he said is the aimless, utter, destructive drift that so many seem content with for the dairy sector. So Dennis Drennan not holding back there, as he is prone to do, but very strong words there. And €5.76 an hour is what they're estimating that dairy farmers will be earning at the moment due to the cost pressures that are out there.
It kind of reinforces all those stories that we've been doing about generation renewal and getting younger people into farming. And you know, so what's the proposition there? If people see that they have to work so hard and actually the return is getting lower, then it makes it a very difficult sell, doesn't it?
Absolutely, 100%. I mean, you are trying to attract young people, have lots of different choices. They can go off traveling, they can go into other sectors, and you are trying to ensure that there are people there to feed us and to feed our population in the generations to come. And we need to make sure that they can make a viable living, that they're respected for the work that they do, and that they can support themselves and their families and their animals and their land to hand it over to the next generation in good order as well, Frances. So yeah, definitely it is something that has to be looked at sooner rather than later.
And our colleague Louise Hickey has been out and about hearing directly from one dairy farmer, Liam Curtis in County Wexford, about some of the pressures that he's facing on a daily basis. So Louise, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, Francis, so many farms and co-ops indicated to us that milk production appears to be down by up to 10%. Speaking to farmer Liam Curtis, he explained what the results of this wet weather is like for him on a day-to-day basis. He estimated that his own yields would be down approximately 3 litres a day, or would face a reduction of about 15% in last year. Curtis said he is now trying to maintain milk levels and continuing to work on increasing butter, fat and protein levels. He said that protein levels in particular have been down this year and that the costs are reflected in the checkbook. He explained that for a dairy farmer that would take on 500,000 litres a year, that they would see a loss of around 70,000 litres, equating to an approximate loss of around €30,000. Here's a clip from Curtis explaining the impacts of this year's weather.
Protein has been really hammered this year. In that, percentage-wise, I suppose, we never got, like, we're barely scraping up to 3.5, and I'd be hoping, like, somewhat normally being up around 3.7s. So that's 0.2 of a difference, which is, you know, when it hits a checkbook or hits a milk statement, it's substantial. And then you factor in the milk yield as well. So the two of them are a double whammy and interlinked. And the weather was a big factor in that, both late spring and prolonged wet weather through March, April, and essentially into May. We've had, shall we say, in Wexford, more long rain than we normally would have. We've had wet springs before. We've had exceptionally long winters before. Could say this started last August with tillage, guys trying to harvest, and try was the word, and it has just continued right up till today. So it's been a long winter, a late spring, and a very damp start to the summer. So we would just love to have sunshine, full stop.
And Francis, while financial impacts are obvious for farmers, there's also that element of mental impacts, which Curtis said was even a bigger problem, and that a reduction of yields is something that will play havoc on people's minds. He said that by talking to farmers and contractors, that the common denominator for everyone is how fickle the mindsets of farmers are at the moment. Another pressing concern for dairy farmers that Curtis mentioned is the nitrates derogation. While Ireland's nitrates derogation currently allows farmers at higher stocking rates up to 250 kg nitrogen per hectare, Curtis said that any changes to the derogation will see a severe reduction in cow numbers. He said that further funding is needed from the EU to help farmers comply with sustainability measures.
Thanks, Louise. And also this week, we've seen the first price indication for milk supplied in June. Lakeland Dairies has confirmed that suppliers will see an increase in the base price from last month for milk supplied in June. It will pay a base price of 43.5 cents a litre based on 3.6% butterfat and 3.3% protein. The base price includes the 0.5 cent a litre sustainability incentive payment. In Northern Ireland, it will pay a base price of 35.8 pence per litre for milk supplied in June. This is also inclusive of the 0.5 pence per litre sustainability incentive payment. Meanwhile, the Ornua monthly purchase price index for the month of June now stands at 140.8, up from the previous month of 135.6. The latest PPI implies an indicative return of 41.5 cents a litre, inclusive of fat, for milk at 3.6% fat and 3.3% protein, which is net of Ornua's cost to market. Now let's move on to the much anticipated €20 million scheme for Suckler farmers. Aisling, when's it actually going to open for applications?
So what we've been told is that the 2024 beef welfare scheme, with an overall budget, as you said, of €20 million, will open for applications in early August. Now, the focus of this scheme will be on practical measures to enhance animal health and husbandry on suckler farms. And the scheme will support farmers in meal feeding suckler calves before and after weaning, and in vaccinating against clostridial diseases and calf pneumonia. Now, the department has said that the meal feeding action is mandatory for all scheme participants, but farmers can indicate when they are selecting the optional vaccination action at application stage if they want to be considered for payment under that action. And then they can decide during the implementation phase of the scheme, where appropriate in consultation with their vet, which disease they want to target depending on the health status of their herds. So under the scheme, there's a maximum total payment of €2,000 available for each participating farmer. That is subject to a maximum of 40 eligible calves on each farm. Now, the payment for the mandatory meal feeding action will be €35 a calf, while the optional vaccination measure will be paid at a rate of €15 a calf. And the department noted that in the event of the scheme being oversubscribed, a linear reduction on the payment amount or the maximum number of animals eligible for payment may be applied. And in order to qualify for the scheme, farmers have to have eligible calves born to eligible suckler cows in the period from July 1st of 2023 to June 30th of this year. Now, they must introduce meal feeding for a period of 4 weeks pre-weaning and 2 weeks post-weaning to reduce the stress on calves at weaning time, we're being told. And if a farmer selects the vaccination action, they must implement a vaccination programme against clostridial diseases and or calf pneumonia in suckler calves, and they have to record details of that vaccination programme as well. And it was noted by the department that that maximum payment of €15 a calf under the vaccination option will be paid at that level, regardless of whether the calf is vaccinated for one or both diseases. So that is something to bear in mind as well. So a total of €50 a calf available under that scheme. And it is set to open for applications in early August, we're being told. But stay tuned to Agriland and we'll let you know when you can send in your application for that.
And what's been the reaction, Aisling, from farmer organisations to that scheme?
Well, the IFA is calling on Minister for Agriculture Charlie McConalogue to address what they're describing as an anomaly in the new beef welfare scheme. So Declan Hanrahan, the IFA National Livestock Committee chair, said that suckler farmers needed to know if the intention was to run the scheme for calves born between July 2023 to June 2024 and the measures required. And he added that autumn 2023 born calves have now been sold and that the opportunity to carry out actions has passed. So the minister, he said, has only confirmed for the first time the measures required, which will be meal feeding and vaccination, as we said, to calves born in that reference period. And he said it's unacceptable and it has to be revisited before the scheme reopens. So we'll see what, if anything, the department and the minister has to say on that.
And just one other update from the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine, which has also proved very popular with our readers this week, is new figures showing a breakdown of the number of goat herds by size, along with the number of goats per county. Goat census forms were issued to 1,483 registered herd keepers in December 2023 to form the National Sheep and Goat Census. And you can find out all the details from what that census tells us on Agriland. Now, our regular listeners will know that very often we cover some less than glowing statistics from the Environment Protection Agency when it comes to the agricultural sector. But this week, we reported on some really good news from the EPA on greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture in 2023. Tell us more, Aisling.
Well, this report shows that agricultural emissions decreased by 4.6% to 20.8 million tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent due to an 18% reduction in fertiliser nitrogen use, reduced lime application and overall reductions in numbers of livestock. And according to the EPA, livestock numbers decreased in general, non-dairy cattle by 1.1%, sheep were down by 1.2% and pigs were down by 4.6%. 8.3%. Now, dairy cow numbers did increase by 0.6%, which is the 13th consecutive year of increases in dairy cow numbers, the EPA told us. However, they did say in this report that milk production had reduced by 4.7% in 2023. So the report basically shows that there's an overall reduction in greenhouse gas emissions of 6.8% compared to 2022 in almost all sectors. And, you know, that is a very positive thing. And Laura Burke, the Director General of the EPA, said Ireland's greenhouse gas emissions last year were at their lowest level in over 3 decades. And she said that was as a result of the large reduction in emissions outside of recession. And she said these are significant findings and that they signal the impact of climate action and decarbonisation measures across Ireland's economy and society. And the EPA has stressed that while these are positive results for this year, unfortunately, Ireland is still well off track in terms of meeting EU and national targets for the end of this decade. Of course, the national climate ambition is a 51% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. For the agriculture sector, we know that it's a 25% reduction as well. And the EPA has said that we need to achieve an extremely challenging annual reduction overall of 8.3% for each of the years for 24 and 25 if Ireland is to stay within the first carbon budget as well. So look, it is positive news. It shows that we are going in the right direction. Minister Charlie McConalogue said agriculture is on the right path, especially following on from the emissions reductions recorded in 2022. He said it was encouraging to see that the work that farmers were doing on the ground was reflected in these results. And he said it was important to maintain this positive trajectory and continue with our efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the sector by 25% by the end of the decade. Now, the IFA President Francie Gorman said that this emissions drop shows the effort that farmers are making as well. And he said that emissions have actually dropped for 3 years in succession. And it's evidence that the measures being adopted by farmers are having an impact. And it's partially due to adopting new technologies such as multi-species sward and better use of organic nutrients. But he did say the increased price of fertiliser has also been a factor out there as well. And he did warn that less fertiliser will lead to less grass growth, which of course in a nation that is, I suppose, dependent on a grass-based system, that is a cause for concern as well. Now, the Irish Creamery Milk Suppliers Association said that the reduction, of course, was welcome, but it's in spite of rather than because of government support. Dennis Drennan said that state policy on helping farmers to reduce emissions was all stick and no carrot, and had contributed notably to the collapse in farm incomes, particularly in the dairy sector, as we mentioned a little while ago.
And just before we go, you will know by now that Minister Roderick O'Gorman has been elected as the Green Party leader. He told Agriland that he recognised that there had been a disconnect between the party and farmers and the rural community. But he also said that the Green Party will now be working hard to make sure that it brings forward policies that deliver meaningful support to farmers and the wider rural economy and rural society as well. So I expect that that is something we're going to be talking about in future podcasts. But unfortunately, we're out of time for now. So from Aisling, Louise and myself, thanks for listening, and please don't forget to rate, review and follow The Farming Week on Spotify, Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. We hope you have a really good week ahead.